The day the HOA demolished my lakeside cabin, Margaret Walsh smiled as the excavator crushed 70 years of memories. She called it progress. What she didn't know, they just destroyed a building on land they never owned. And when I pulled a 1952 survey from my pocket, her $2.3 million community project became a crime scene. This is how a property map turned a bully into a cautionary tale. I am David Martinez, 32, and after years of working as a geological surveyor, I had saved enough money to buy a piece of lakefront property. The old cabin on Willowbrook Lake seemed perfect. The weathered cedar walls had turned a beautiful silvery gray over decades of lake weather. It was exactly the peaceful retreat I dreamed of after spending years mapping remote mineral sites across 3 states. Meanwhile, Margaret Walsh had moved into the Willowbrook estate 6 months before I bought my cabin. A sharp-tongued corporate attorney who had lost her high-paying job in a downsizing, she decided to channel her considerable energy and need for control into what she called community improvement. With a perfectly styled bob that never seemed to blow in the wind, and an attitude that screamed, "I went to law school, so I know better than you." She had quickly become HOA president by promising to turn the lake into what she called a resort-quality amenity. The first warning shot came on a Tuesday morning in early spring. A thick certified letter that required my signature immediately put me on edge. The letter hit like a subpoena: $200 per day until you demolish your cabin. Margaret's violations? My cedar siding wasn't beige enough. My grandfather's stone path created drainage issues. Even my bird feeders were environmental hazards. According to Margaret's detailed list, my cabin's natural cedar siding violated the newly instituted earth tone paint requirement. My hand-split rail fence was inadequately maintained and structurally questionable. My gravel driveway created drainage issues affecting community water management. My wooden dock needed immediate repairs to meet current safety standards. The financial penalty was steep and escalating, with fines doubling each week thereafter. I spent that entire evening at my kitchen table, reading through every page of the HOA covenants with the same methodical attention I'd learned to apply to geological surveys. What I discovered was troubling: several contradictions between old and new rules, and a disturbing pattern of restrictions that had been added through emergency amendments after I'd purchased my property. The original covenants were far more lenient and specifically grandfathered existing structures, but somehow new restrictions kept appearing in monthly newsletters disguised as helpful reminders. Week 2 brought Margaret herself, accompanied by 2 board members carrying official clipboards and expensive cameras. Her red blazer looked like a warning flag as she sank into my gravel driveway. "This isn't some rural campground, Mr. Martinez," she sneered, photographing my kayak rack like it was evidence. When I asked why, her board member muttered, "We protect investments from people like you." They arrived unannounced on Saturday morning, marching across my property like investigators at a crime scene. Margaret wore that bright red blazer that looked completely out of place in the natural setting, and her black pumps kept sinking into my gravel driveway as she directed her team to photograph everything from multiple angles. They documented my cabin's weathered shingles, the natural stone walkway my grandfather had helped me build, my kayak storage rack, even the bird feeders hanging from my porch eaves. Margaret made elaborate notes about potential environmental hazards and odors affecting community air quality, though my cabin was meticulously maintained and actually smelled like cedar and clean lake air. When I politely stepped outside to ask what they were doing, her response was swift and cutting. She gestured dismissively at my cabin as if it were a homeless encampment, rather than a lovingly maintained piece of local history. By week 3, Margaret had escalated to community-wide character assassination. An email blast went out to all 200 Willowbrook residents with the subject line, non-cooperative residents and declining property values. Without naming me directly, it described a shoreline property owner who was selfishly obstructing vital community improvements and forcing his personal aesthetic preferences on hard-working homeowners who deserve better. The email included professionally rendered before and after images showing Margaret's planned lakeside walking path and clubhouse complex, with my cabin digitally erased and replaced by beautiful community amenities. She concluded with a call for residents to support your HOA leadership in removing obstacles to progress. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid me. Susan Chen's grocery store whisper cut deepest. Some people don't understand community sacrifice. Even Bill, who'd shared beers on my dock, walked his dog with blinders on. That's when I launched my drone. Not for revenge, but because surveyors spot lies in land that people miss. The social isolation was more painful than I'd expected. Invitations to community barbecues and holiday parties mysteriously stopped coming. At the grocery store, I overheard conversations about people who just don't understand that living in a community means making compromises for the greater good. My next-door neighbor, Bill Thompson, who'd always been friendly, started avoiding eye contact when he walked his dog past my property. During this period of mounting social pressure, I began using my professional-grade surveying drone to map the area around my property. Partly, this was to document the harassment and changes happening around the lake, but mostly it was because old habits die hard. After 15 years of geological surveys, I was instinctively curious about the land formations and property boundaries that nobody else seemed to understand. The high-resolution aerial footage revealed interesting discrepancies between what the community assumed about property lines and what the actual topography suggested. Week 4 brought serious legal threats designed to intimidate me into submission. Their attorney's letter accused me of trespassing on my own land. Margaret's call was colder. Our lawyers confirmed you're squatting on public property. Click. That's when I knew she wasn't cutting corners. She'd buried the truth. The HOA's attorney, a firm from the state capitol with impressive letterhead, sent a cease and desist letter accusing me of unlawfully occupying public waterfront land and demanding I remove my cabin within 48 hours or face immediate litigation. The letter claimed my property boundaries had been incorrectly surveyed during the original sale and that my cabin sat partially on community land specifically designated for public recreational use. When I called Margaret directly to request official boundary maps and survey documentation to support these serious accusations, her response was typically arrogant and dismissive. "Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice dripping with false patience, "we don't need to justify our legally sound actions to someone who's clearly in violation of multiple community standards and property laws. Our attorney has thoroughly reviewed the situation with county officials, and frankly, you're trespassing on community property that was always intended for public use." She hung up before I could respond. Week 5 marked my decision to fight back with the tools I knew best. I quietly contacted the county land registry office and requested the complete historical survey documentation for my property, dating back to the original land grants from the 1950s. As a professional geological surveyor, I knew how to read these technical documents better than most attorneys, and I wanted to understand exactly what Tom McNeil had sold me and what rights came with the property. Meanwhile, I installed a comprehensive security camera system around my cabin's perimeter, positioning cameras to capture anyone approaching my property from any direction. Margaret immediately filed a complaint, claiming that my cameras invaded neighbors' privacy and created an atmosphere of surveillance that undermines community trust. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was protesting my surveillance of land she insisted I didn't own, while simultaneously photographing and documenting my every move. The breaking point came during week 6, while I was away on what turned out to be my final work assignment, a 2-day mineral rights survey in the northern part of the state. I'd left on Wednesday morning, expecting to return Friday evening to my peaceful cabin retreat. Instead, I returned to splinters. Margaret live-streamed my grandfather's hand-carved bed becoming kindling, praising her courage to 50,000 cheering viewers. "Sue us," she smiled, brushing sawdust off her blazer. Little did she know, her bulldozer just gave me perfect evidence. Margaret stood in the center of the destruction like a general surveying a conquered battlefield, directing a cleanup crew with a bulldozer while live streaming the entire operation on social media. Her video, which I later learned had gone viral with over 50,000 views and hundreds of supportive comments, showed her explaining how the HOA was taking decisive community action to remove unauthorized structures from public waterfront property. She walked through the debris pile, pointing out pieces of my furniture and personal belongings, while describing them as evidence of illegal occupation. Comments poured in from viewers, praising the HOA's strong leadership, commitment to community standards, and courage to stand up to selfish property owners who think rules don't apply to them. When I pulled into what used to be my driveway and saw the complete destruction, Margaret was posing for photos next to a pile of my grandfather's hand-carved furniture, which had been smashed into kindling by the demolition equipment. She saw me approaching and actually smiled, clearly expecting me to break down or explode in anger. Instead, her casual cruelty crystallized my resolve. "You can sue if you want, Mr. Martinez," she said, brushing sawdust off her red blazer. "But we have better lawyers than you can imagine. And frankly, you should have moved that illegal shack months ago when we first asked nicely." But Margaret had made a crucial tactical error that would ultimately destroy her. By demolishing my cabin, she'd inadvertently made my professional survey work much easier and given me irrefutable evidence of property destruction. Instead of the emotional breakdown she expected, I found myself smiling coldly as I told her, "Thank you for clearing the site, Miss Walsh. This will make the comprehensive land survey much more straightforward." Over the next 3 days, I methodically used professional GPS equipment, ground-penetrating radar, and satellite measurements to map every inch of my property and the surrounding area with precision that would hold up in any court. As GPS mapped the rubble, neighbors gathered. "That equipment costs more than my house," murmured retired teacher Patterson. "Who are you, David?" Margaret scoffed, but her smile faded when I aimed the ground-penetrating radar at her construction site. Margaret, watching me work with obviously expensive surveying equipment, probably thought I was having some kind of breakdown or midlife crisis. But several neighbors began gathering to watch me work, asking questions about the sophisticated technology and starting to wonder about my professional background. Patterson, the retired teacher who lived 2 houses down, commented that she'd never seen such precise equipment outside of major construction projects. The original 1952 county survey maps revealed a stunning truth that would change everything. The McNeil family had purchased 47 acres in a single transaction, including the entire western shoreline of Willowbrook Lake and extending exactly 200 feet eastward from the high water mark. What the current HOA claimed was public land designated for community use was actually sitting squarely in the middle of my legally purchased property. The developers who built Willowbrook Estate in the 1990s had apparently made assumptions about shoreline access without properly researching the original land grants and boundary establishment records. My demolished cabin hadn't just been sitting on my own land. The entire $2.3 million clubhouse project was being constructed on property I legally owned without my knowledge or consent. Every foundation footing, every utility line, every landscaped walkway was trespassing on my private property. The breakthrough that would seal Margaret's fate came when Tom McNeil heard about the demolition through neighborhood gossip and drove over to see what had happened to his family's legacy. The 78-year-old man stood in my driveway, shaking with fury, as he surveyed the destruction. That cabin was built by my grandfather in 1955, he told me, his voice trembling with emotion and anger. Every board, every stone in that fireplace, every window frame was crafted by hand. That woman destroyed 70 years of my family's history. Tom had kept meticulous records in his basement, including copies of the original agreement his family had made with the county in 1952, officially recognizing their private ownership of the entire lakeshore and establishing permanent riparian rights. Armed with overwhelming documentation, I hired Sarah Kim, the most successful real estate attorney in our three-county region, known for winning 15 consecutive land dispute cases against developers, municipalities, and HOAs. They didn't just illegally demolish your cabin, she said, looking up at me with genuine amazement. They're building a multi-million-dollar facility on your private property, without permits, without your consent, and without apparently bothering to research who actually owns the land. This isn't just a lawsuit. This is a legal earthquake that's going to reshape how HOAs operate in this county. Our investigation revealed that Margaret had violated numerous HOA procedures and legal requirements in her rush to destroy my cabin and advance her clubhouse project. She'd failed to provide the required 30-day written notice to community members before taking emergency action. She'd never held the mandatory community vote required for expenditures over $50,000. She'd personally signed construction contracts that exceeded her authority under the HOA's own bylaws. Most damaging, she'd made multiple false statements to contractors and county officials about the HOA's legal right to demolish structures and build on the disputed land. For my final strategic move, I requested an emergency HOA meeting to discuss fair compensation for property damage and establish clear boundaries for future community development. Margaret eagerly agreed to host the meeting, confident she could pressure me into accepting a token settlement and signing away any future claims. She had no idea I'd invited the county building inspector, a journalist from the regional newspaper, my attorney, and Tom McNeil to observe the proceedings and provide expert testimony about property rights and construction violations. The Willowbrook Estate Community Center was packed beyond capacity with over 200 residents, my invited expert witnesses, and several people who'd driven from neighboring communities after hearing about the controversy through social media. Margaret put the meeting to order, wearing her signature red blazer and an expression of supreme confidence, clearly expecting to control the narrative and emerge victorious. She began with a polished multimedia presentation about her transformative resort community vision, complete with glossy architectural renderings of the nearly completed clubhouse, professional landscape designs, and financial projections showing increased property values for all residents. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret announced, clicking through slides that showed the clubhouse's granite countertops, vaulted ceilings, and lakeside deck. This $2.3 million investment represents the future of Willowbrook Estate. We're creating amenities that rival exclusive resorts, and every homeowner here will benefit from significantly increased property values. She described my demolished cabin as an unfortunate eyesore that had obstructed progress and community development, framing the demolition as a necessary step toward realizing the community's potential. Margaret's slideshow contrasted professional photographs of my weathered cedar cabin with computer-generated images of families enjoying the new clubhouse facilities. The crowd applauded enthusiastically as Margaret painted herself as a visionary leader who'd overcome obstacles and opposition to deliver unprecedented community amenities. Mr. Martinez bought an old fishing shack and somehow convinced himself he owned rights to our entire shoreline, Margaret declared, her voice rising with righteous indignation. We've been patient far too long with individuals who put their personal interests above community welfare and property values. Margaret's confidence reached its peak as she concluded her presentation with financial projections, showing how the clubhouse would increase every home's value by an average of $50,000. Sometimes real leadership means making difficult decisions for the greater good, she declared, gesturing toward the demolished cabin site visible through the meeting room windows. I'm proud that our HOA had the courage to move forward despite opposition from someone who clearly didn't understand community living or property law. When Margaret finished her clubhouse slideshow to applause, I projected the 1952 survey. Your resort? I traced the red boundary over her granite countertops. That's my kitchen. The room gasped as her attorney whispered loud enough to be heard. If this is real, we just committed $1 million trespass. When Margaret finally invited me to respond, I calmly walked to the front of the room and opened my laptop, connecting it to the same projection system she'd used for her presentation. Thank you, Miss Walsh, for that comprehensive introduction. I've also prepared some visual materials that I think will interest everyone here tonight. The first image I projected was the original 1952 county survey map, with my property boundaries marked in bold red lines that clearly encompassed not just my cabin site, but the entire area where the new clubhouse stood. A murmur went through the crowd as residents began to understand the implications of what they were seeing. This official county survey shows the actual legal boundaries of the property I purchased from Tom McNeil, I explained, using a laser pointer to trace the property lines. As you can see, my land doesn't just include the cabin site. It extends to include the entire area where the clubhouse is currently under construction. Margaret's confident expression began to falter as she stared at the projection screen, clearly seeing this documentation for the first time. Her face went pale as she realized that every assumption underlying her project might be completely wrong. I methodically presented each piece of evidence, explaining the technical details in language everyone could understand. The certified property deed from the county registrar showed my ownership of 47 acres. Current GPS survey data matched the original maps with surveyor-grade precision. The notarized purchase agreement clearly stated 47 acres, including all waterfront access rights and riparian privileges. Email confirmations from the county building inspector confirmed that the HOA had never obtained proper demolition permits or construction authorization for work on my property. The cabin you demolished wasn't just legally constructed on my land, I continued, advancing to a slide showing the clubhouse construction site overlaid with property boundary lines. More importantly, the clubhouse you're building is also entirely on my private property, and construction began without my permission, without proper permits, and without any legal authority. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as residents realized they'd been supporting what amounted to trespassing and theft. Margaret tried desperately to interrupt, claiming the documents were fabricated or somehow manipulated. But my attorney, Sarah Kim, stood up from the audience. I represent Mr. Martinez, and I can assure everyone that every document has been verified by the county registrar's office, the state geological survey, and independent surveying professionals. We also have county building inspector Tom Bradley here tonight to address the permit violations. Inspector Bradley confirmed that the HOA had violated multiple construction codes, demolishing structures without permits, building on property they didn't own, and violating environmental regulations governing lakeshores and wetlands. The room fell silent as Tom McNeil slowly stood up, his 78-year-old frame commanding respect from everyone present. I sold that property to David Martinez last year, he said in a clear, strong voice that carried to every corner of the room. My family has owned that land since 1952, and every acre, every foot of shoreline, every right and privilege was legally transferred to him. That cabin Margaret destroyed was built by my grandfather's hands, and this HOA had no more right to demolish it than they'd have to demolish any of your homes. Margaret's face went ashen as her own attorney whispered urgently in her ear, loudly enough for nearby residents to hear. Miss Walsh, if these property documents are authentic, we could be facing millions in liability for trespassing, destruction of property, and unauthorized construction. Residents began asking increasingly pointed and angry questions. Had Margaret independently decided to demolish the cabin without proper board approval? Why hadn't she verified ownership before spending millions on construction? How much community money had been spent on a project that might now be worthless? Who would be financially responsible if the clubhouse had to be demolished? An elderly woman with silver hair stood up, her voice shaking with anger. We've been completely deceived. Miss Walsh told us the clubhouse was being built on free community land, but apparently we're trespassing on someone's private property and may have to tear down everything we've built. The mood in the room shifted dramatically as residents realized they'd been manipulated into supporting what amounted to theft, vandalism, and fraud. People who'd enthusiastically supported Margaret's vision now saw her as the source of potential financial disaster. Board members began distancing themselves, claiming they'd relied on Margaret's legal research and trusted her professional judgment. Several residents demanded Margaret's immediate resignation and a complete audit of HOA finances to determine how much money had been spent without proper authorization. Margaret tried desperately to regain control of the meeting, but her authority had evaporated along with her credibility. This is all a misunderstanding that can be worked out through negotiation, she pleaded. But residents were no longer interested in her explanations. Someone called for an immediate vote of no confidence, and hands shot up throughout the room. The final tally was overwhelming. 187 residents voting for Margaret's removal, with only 13 supporting her continued leadership. I concluded by addressing the entire community with a measured tone that emphasized solutions rather than punishment. I don't want anyone here to suffer financially because of these mistakes, but I do expect fair compensation for my demolished cabin, immediate cessation of unauthorized construction on my property, and Ms. Walsh's resignation for breach of fiduciary duty and violation of community trust. Margaret Walsh resigned on the spot, her red blazer wrinkled and her confident demeanor completely shattered as residents filed out. Many approached me with sincere apologies and questions about finding a solution that would work for everyone while protecting their investments. Within 30 days, Margaret faced a cascade of legal and financial consequences that effectively destroyed her life in our community. I filed a civil lawsuit seeking $150,000 in damages for the cabin destruction, emotional distress, and violation of property rights. The county imposed a $50,000 fine on the HOA for construction violations and ordered immediate work stoppage until proper permits could be obtained and property ownership verified. Most devastatingly for Margaret personally, residents filed a class action lawsuit against her individually for exceeding authority, breach of fiduciary duty, and causing financial harm to the community through her unauthorized decisions and failure to perform basic due diligence. The mounting legal bills and potential judgments forced Margaret to sell her Willowbrook home at a significant loss and relocate out of state. Her career as a lawyer was effectively over as the State Bar Association opened an investigation into her conduct and professional competence. Before leaving town, she stopped by my property one final time. Her usual arrogance replaced by defeated exhaustion and what might have been genuine remorse. I really was just trying to build something beautiful for the community, she said quietly, staring at the construction site where her dream clubhouse sat half-finished and legally doomed. My response was measured but firm. Good intentions don't justify illegal methods, and leadership requires understanding the law, not just ignoring it. The resolution ultimately benefited everyone except Margaret and created a stronger, more united community. Working closely with the newly elected HOA board, I helped design a modified development plan that served residents' needs while respecting property rights and legal requirements. The clubhouse was relocated to a genuinely community-owned parcel on the eastern side of the lake, smaller in scale than Margaret's grandiose vision, but still attractive, functional, and legally sound. I granted the community a permanent easement for one-third of my shoreline to create the lakeside walking path residents had wanted, while maintaining privacy and exclusive access to the remaining waterfront. In place of my demolished cabin, I built a beautiful, modern lodge-style home that complemented the natural setting while clearly establishing my presence and investment in the property. The community elected me as the new HOA president, and I implemented comprehensive reforms designed to prevent future abuses of power and protect residents' rights. The HOA bylaws were completely rewritten for clarity and transparency, requiring public votes on all major expenditures. We established a property rights committee with rotating membership to review all proposed changes and ensure legal compliance. A year later, my new cabin stands where Margaret's clubhouse was planned. We built the walking path together. On the third of shoreline I chose to share. She's now a boundary dispute lawyer. Poetic? Maybe. But the real lesson's simpler. When someone says it's for the greater good, check if they own what they're destroying. 1 year later, I stood on my new wooden dock at sunset, watching neighboring families enjoy the collaborative fishing areas and walking paths we developed together. My modern cabin blended beautifully with the landscape, proving that thoughtful development and environmental preservation could coexist when guided by mutual respect and legal compliance. Tom McNeil visited regularly with his great-grandchildren, delighted to see his family's legacy honored and preserved rather than destroyed by ignorance and arrogance. The transformation of Willowbrook Estate became a widely cited example of how knowledge, patience, and proper legal procedures can triumph over bullying, abuse of power, and institutional arrogance. I eventually wrote a detailed account of the experience that was shared thousands of times on social media and referenced in property law courses at several universities. The central message was simple but powerful. When someone claims to break the law for the greater good, they usually mean their own good, and the only real protection for everyone is insisting that all of us, especially those in positions of authority, follow the same rules. Margaret's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming authority without understanding responsibility. She eventually found work as a real estate attorney specializing in property boundary research, apparently having learned the hard way about the importance of checking survey maps before offering legal advice. Meanwhile, Willowbrook Lake became a model of successful community cooperation, regularly hosting visits from other HOAs seeking to learn from our collaborative approach to balancing individual rights with collective interests. The lesson was clear. True community strength comes not from bulldozing opposition, but from building bridges based on mutual respect and legal accountability.